Tonight, let us drift back in time to a world far removed from the gentle comforts of our modern lives. A place where dust swirled along endless plains, where lonely winds whispered through canyon walls, and where each day began and ended under an unbroken sky of shimmering stars. This is the American Wild West, a vast, rugged expanse that stretched from the rolling prairies of the Midwest all the way to the sunburned deserts of New Mexico and Arizona. Here we find stories not of swift duels or galloping chases, but of quiet persistence, of hard-won meals and humble shelters. As we explore these histories tonight, allow your mind to slow, your breath to deepen. Picture the wide open spaces, the crackle of campfires, the low murmur of voices sharing tales against the hush of the frontier night. We will wander gently through 4 chapters of this bygone era, beginning first with the harsh daily realities faced by settlers, cowboys, and indigenous communities alike. Then we will linger on the shadowy life of Billy the Kid, peering past legend into tender human moments. From there we will follow ghostly trails of lost gold and whispered treasure maps, letting the mysteries of the West unravel softly around us. At last we will stand in the fine parlors of the wealthy elite to see how their lives contrasted so sharply with the rough hands and weary faces of the common folk. Let these stories be like a slow stream, carrying you deeper into calm, into sleep if you wish. There is no hurry here on the frontier, only the patient turning of time and the gentle rustle of history as it moves through the grass. In the early days of the American frontier, life was governed not by clocks on a mantelpiece, but by the slow arc of the sun across the sky. For settlers who made their way westward in creaking wagons, each morning began before the pale glow of dawn even touched the horizon. Picture a small cabin of rough-hewn logs set along the edge of a vast prairie. Its walls are chinked with mud to keep out the cold winds that slip like ghosts across the land. Inside, a woman rises quietly from her straw-filled mattress, careful not to wake the smallest children still tangled in blankets. Her breath turns to faint mist in the dim air. Outside, a rooster gives a tentative crow. The man of the house might already be at work, splitting fence rails, checking traps set the evening before, or leading a mule toward the nearest creek for water. These daily labors were endless. Each task, drawing water, milking goats, hauling firewood, was done by hand, each motion slow, methodical, demanding a steady patience that left the body sore by nightfall. The earth itself was no easy partner. In spring, rains could flood freshly planted crops, turning the ground into sucking mud. Come summer, relentless sun would dry the soil into hard clay, cracking underfoot. Winter brought biting winds and snow that piled against doors, sealing families inside for days, with only the smoke from a small hearth to keep them company. And yet, despite the hardship, there were moments of quiet beauty. A pot of beans simmering over an open hearth, children's laughter as they chased one another around the cabin, the simple satisfaction of a loaf of bread rising warm from the ashes. These humble joys wove themselves into the otherwise harsh tapestry of frontier life, offering small comforts amid the struggle. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in tender hues of rose and gold, families would gather by the meager light of oil lamps. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the dark fields. Inside, voices murmured low over plates of salted pork and cornbread. Sleep came early, cradled by the faint smell of smoke and the hope that tomorrow might be a little easier. Now, let us wander a little farther west, where the open range stretches to meet distant hills, and where the life of the cowboy unfolded under a sky so wide it seemed to have no end. Contrary to the stories spun in dime novels, most cowboys did not spend their days chasing bandits or dueling at high noon. Instead, their world was a quiet, dusty rhythm of tending cattle from dawn to dusk, sometimes for weeks on end without sight of a town or even another soul beyond their small crew. Imagine a lean young man astride a wiry Mustang, hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the glare. In the early light, the grass is silvered with dew, and the cattle stand together in small huddles, steam rising from their flanks into the cool air. A gentle creak of leather accompanies each breath of his horse. Nearby, another rider whistles softly, coaxing a few stragglers back toward the herd. Throughout the day, the cowboys watch over the animals with a steady vigilance. Their eyes scan constantly for signs of trouble. A calf lost in a gulch, a steer favoring a lame-legged, or worse yet, the dark shapes of rustlers or predators lurking at the edges of the range. But mostly, it is hours upon hours of slow travel, guiding the herd to fresh pasture or a distant water hole. Meals on the trail are humble affairs. Picture a circle of tired men gathered around a blackened coffee pot and an iron skillet set over glowing coals. They eat beans spiced only with salt and bacon grease, mop up the juices with hard biscuits, and pass around 10 cups of coffee, strong enough to make the heart skip. There is little conversation, just the soft crackle of the fire and the shuffle of boots on dry earth. As night falls, 1 or 2 cowboys take first watch, riding slow loops around the dozing herd to keep them calm. The others stretch out their bedrolls beneath the stars. Without lanterns or lamps, the sky becomes their ceiling, a dome glittering with countless pinpricks of light, so bright and close it feels like it could be touched. Coyotes sing in the distance, and somewhere an owl calls from a cottonwood tree. Wrapped in their blankets, the cowboys drift off, bodies sore from long hours in the saddle, yet soothed by the immense quiet of the prairie night. In these peaceful moments, with only the sigh of wind and the breath of cattle to keep them company, the hardships of the day fade, leaving behind a stillness that settles deep into the soul. Let us now journey to the villages and camps of the indigenous peoples who had lived upon these lands long before wagons ever carved ruts into the earth. Their days, too, were filled with quiet labor, guided by the turning seasons and the gifts of the land itself. Picture a small encampment set along a riverbank, where willows bend gracefully toward the water, and the air is rich with the scent of damp earth and wild mint. Smoke rises in slender threads from conical lodges, drifting upward to mingle with drifting clouds. Here, life moves at a measured pace, each activity woven into the rhythms of sun and moon, of growing things and hunting trails. At dawn, the camp begins to stir. Women tend to fires, adding small branches until flames lick eagerly at pots of simmering stew. The gentle clatter of stone on wood echoes as someone grinds corn into meal, the grains slowly breaking under practiced hands. Nearby, children's laughter ripples through the air as they chase one another between drying racks where strips of venison hang, dark and fragrant. Men gather their bows and spears, preparing to follow ancient paths through the forest or across the rolling plains. Their footsteps are nearly soundless, a soft rustle in the grasses, as they track deer or follow the winding trails left by herds of buffalo. Each hunt is not merely a quest for meat, but a ceremony of deep respect, an understanding of the delicate balance that sustains both hunter and hunted. Evenings bring gentle gatherings. Families sit close around the fire, sharing stories passed down through countless generations. The old ones speak in low, melodic voices, telling of how the world came to be, how the stars were placed in the sky, and how people learned to live together with all the creatures of the earth. Children rest their heads on their mothers' laps, eyelids growing heavy as embers glow softly, casting fleeting shadows on painted hides. Above them, the night sky stretches vast and serene. The constellations, familiar and comforting, remind them of ancestors who once walked these same paths, paddled these same rivers, gazed at these same stars. In such quiet moments there is a profound peace, a sense that life, though filled with its own trials of hunger, weather, and wandering, is part of a larger, gentler story written by the land itself. In the rugged mining towns that dotted the American frontier, daily life was a different sort of struggle, a restless pursuit of fortune beneath harsh skies and harsher ground. These settlements often sprang up overnight, clusters of rough wooden shacks and canvas tents huddled along muddy streets, drawn together by rumors of gold or silver hidden deep within the hills. Imagine walking through such a town at first light. The streets are rutted and sticky from last night's rain, lined with hitching posts and the faint, lingering smell of horse sweat. A stray dog noses through heaps of discarded food, while smoke curls lazily from chimneys as miners' wives begin to cook simple breakfasts over crackling hearths. Inside one of these cabins, a miner prepares for the long day ahead. His face is weathered, lined by sun and worry, his hands already dark with the permanent stain of earth. He gathers his tools, a battered pickaxe, a shallow pan for sifting through river gravel, a small sack for anything precious he might find. There is no guarantee he will return with even the faintest glint of gold, but still he goes, driven by a quiet hope that tomorrow's toil might be the one that changes everything. Down by the creek, men stand ankle-deep in icy water, swirling muddy gravel in wide pans. They move slowly, methodically, eyes fixed on the swirling sediment, hoping for the tiny weight of fortune to appear amid the dull grit. Others dig narrow shafts into hillsides, lanterns bobbing in the gloom, the air heavy with the scent of damp stone and sweat. Yet alongside these labors, life must still be lived. Women mend shirts by dim windows, patching tears with careful stitches. Children play stick games in the lanes, their laughter clear and bright above the clatter of wagons and the hammering of new boards on half-built storefronts. A lone musician might sit on a stoop in the evening, coaxing a slow, plaintive tune from a fiddle, the notes rising into the warm dusk. As the sun dips behind jagged ridges, lanterns flicker to life along the street. Inside small saloons, miners gather to share weak beer and quiet conversation, voices dropping low as they speak of veins of quartz or the rumor of a rich strike just over the next ridge. But eventually even these murmurs fade, giving way to the hush of night. The stars emerge bright and unblinking, looking down upon this tiny outpost of human yearning with ancient, indifferent light. Here in these mining towns, life was a delicate balance of crushing disappointment and fragile hope, stitched together by the small rituals of daily survival, a loaf of bread rising by the hearth, a mended boot, a gentle song at twilight. And though fortunes might never come, there was still a quiet dignity in the way each person rose with the dawn to try again. Now let us leave behind the broad sweep of daily frontier life and step quietly into the shadowed legend of a single figure, Billy the Kid. His name still drifts through the American imagination like dust on the wind, half fact, half ghost story. But beneath the swirling myths lay a boy who grew up amid poverty and turmoil, whose days were marked by small moments of longing and fragile joys, just like any other. Billy was born Henry McCarty, though he would also be known as William Bonney. His earliest years were spent not on some sun-scorched range, but in the bustling quarters of New York City. Picture narrow streets cluttered with carts and stray dogs, crowded tenements rising damp and cold from cobblestones, slick with rain. It was here that Billy learned his first lessons about hunger and uncertainty, lessons that would follow him westward. When he was still young, his mother packed their few belongings and joined the tide of settlers moving toward the promise of a better life. They ended up in the arid towns of New Mexico Territory, where the wind carried sand into every crack and crevice, and where opportunity often took on a rough and dangerous shape. In these dusty settlements, Billy spent his days like many boys did. Imagine him leaning against the sun-bleached side of a saloon, boots scuffed, hat tipped low, eyes following the slow passage of wagons down the street. Perhaps he shared stolen apples with other boys, or skipped stones across the surface of a shallow creek, watching the ripples fan out in widening rings. At night, he might have lain awake on a coarse blanket, listening to the laughter and piano music drifting from nearby dance halls, dreaming of something brighter. But life was not gentle for an orphan in the borderlands. Work was scarce, and disputes were often settled by the quick draw of a revolver rather than by any court of law. Billy's world was a swirl of small dangers, gambling tables that could turn violent in a breath, drunken arguments that flared into gunfights, and the ever-present worry of where the next meal might come from. Even so, there were moments of calm. Picture a cool evening where Billy sits on a porch rail, a soft harmonica tune drifting from inside, the sky painted in tender purples and deepening blues. The scent of mesquite wood hangs in the air, and for a little while the troubles of the world seem to pause, held at bay by the simple magic of twilight. These were the quiet beginnings of the boy who would become the Kid, a young life balancing on the edge of hardship and wonder. Not yet the legend he would later become, but simply a restless soul trying to find his place under the wide and indifferent sky. As Billy grew older, the fragile threads holding his life to any semblance of peace began to fray. The New Mexico Territory in the late 1870s was a land simmering with rivalries, cattle barons, merchants, and lawmen all vying for power in a place where justice was often bought or borrowed. Into this uneasy landscape Billy stepped with the uncertain gait of youth, still half a boy yet quickly learning the hard lessons of survival. It was during the Lincoln County War that Billy's name truly began to take root in the soil of legend. Imagine small adobe buildings clustered along a dusty main street, the air shimmering with heat. Inside, men spoke in hushed voices, hands never far from the weight of their holstered pistols. Factions formed over competing business interests, each side gathering its own rough band of supporters, ready to spill blood over contracts and cattle herds. Billy, drawn by loyalty and a yearning perhaps for belonging, took up arms alongside a group known as the Regulators. It was not some grand crusade, but rather a tangle of feuds and betrayals, where one killing led to another in an unsteady chain. He became known for his speed with a gun, yet it was less the mark of a cold killer than the grim necessity of staying alive in a place where hesitation could mean death. Still, beyond the headlines of wanted posters and breathless newspaper stories, there was another side to Billy. Picture a small tavern lit by smoky lanterns, where he sat at a rough-hewn table, laughing softly with friends, a faint smile easing the usual wary tension from his eyes. Or imagine him leaning back in a wooden chair, guitar in hand, plucking out simple melodies that wove through the murmur of the evening like a gentle river. There were dances, too, even amid the simmer of conflict. Billy was known to enjoy the swirl of music and skirts, the fleeting grace of a waltz under strings of lanterns. For a few precious hours, the troubles of the land fell away, replaced by laughter, warm bread, and the sweet bite of cheap whiskey. But always the tensions returned. Outside these tender moments, the land lay waiting, dry and patient. The grudges that stalked Lincoln County did not tire, and so Billy could never truly set aside his gun. Each dawn found him once more looking over his shoulder, listening for distant hoofbeats, knowing that the same wide sky which sheltered him also watched, indifferent as his legend slowly took shape in dust and blood. As the months passed, Billy's life became a quiet drift from one refuge to another, each more temporary than the last. He rode across endless plains and through narrow canyons where the shadows clung long after sunrise, always seeking a brief haven from the lawmen and bounty hunters who carried his name on crumpled posters in their saddlebags. Picture him on a cool morning, riding a lean bay horse along a narrow trail that winds between cottonwood trees. The leaves whisper above him, stirred by a gentle breeze. His eyes scan the horizon constantly, alert to the slightest stir of dust that might signal riders approaching. Yet for a time all remained still, and the only sounds are the quiet creak of his saddle and the soft huff of the horse's breath. Sometimes Billy found shelter on lonely ranches, welcomed by families who saw in him not an outlaw, but a courteous young man with a shy grin and a willingness to mend fences or carry water from the well. In these places life slowed. Picture an evening where he sits on a porch step, a mug of coffee warming his hands, as children chase fireflies across the yard and an old dog sighs contentedly at his feet. For a moment he might imagine that he could stay, that he was simply another drifter stopping by, with no dark reputation trailing him like a restless ghost. Yet the spell always broke. News traveled swiftly across the frontier, carried by stage drivers, telegraph wires, and idle talk in general stores. Before long, someone would recognize the young man with the quick smile and sharper drawl. Whispers would turn into cautious glances, and cautious glances into quiet departures to alert the nearest sheriff. Billy would feel the old tightening in his chest, the subtle prickle at the back of his neck that told him it was time to move on. And so he rode again, under vast skyted with drifting clouds. Nights found him curled in a blanket beside a small fire, the distant stars his only witnesses. Sometimes he lay awake for hours listening to the rustle of grass and the calls of night birds, turning over memories of laughter and dance halls and gentle hands, moments of human warmth that felt all the more precious for how swiftly they vanished. In these solitary hours, Billy the Kid was not the fearsome outlaw of legend, but simply a lonely young man beneath an indifferent, sky longing for a peace that forever seemed to hover just out of reach like a mirage wavering on the sunlit plains. The final chapter of Billy's short life unfolded in much the same quiet, drifting way it always had, though the shadows around him grew longer and darker with each passing month. By then the kid was scarcely more than 20, yet already burdened with the weight of countless stories, some true, many wildly embroidered by anxious townsfolk and eager newspapermen. Through it all he remained elusive, moving from dusty settlement to windswept camp, his legend growing even as his circle of refuge shrank. Picture him in the dim interior of a small adobe house on the outskirts of Fort Sumner. A lantern flickers on a rough wooden table, casting long, unsteady shadows across the walls. Billy sits with a few trusted friends, sharing a quiet meal of beans and bread. Laughter comes easily enough in such company, though it is tempered by watchful glances toward the door, by hands that rest just a little too near to the polished grips of their revolvers. Outside, the New Mexico night unfolds cool and wide. Crickets sing in the grass. A soft wind moves across the hard-packed earth, carrying with it the faint smell of sagebrush and far-off rain. For a few precious hours there is a fragile sense of safety, as though the world might forget its pursuit, allowing Billy to slip free into some gentler existence. But the world did not forget. Sheriff Pat Garrett, determined and patient, tracked Billy with a methodical calm that was all the more dangerous for its quietness. Each friendly door closed a little sooner. Each town seemed to regard the kid with eyes a little harder. The frontier was wide, but word traveled swiftly, carried by cautious tongues and the steady trot of horses across moonlit trails. Then came the night when Garrett finally found him. It was not some grand showdown under a blazing sun, as the stories would later claim. Instead, it was a dark room, a hushed conversation cut short, the sudden crack of a pistol that seemed to echo forever under the low rafters. Just like that, Billy's restless journey ended, not with the fiery glory of legend, but in the small, still tragedy of a single young life halted in the shadows. And so the boy who had once skipped stones on shallow creeks, who laughed and danced and strummed gentle chords on borrowed guitars, became immortal in story even as his real heart fell silent. Outside that little house, the wind went on sighing through the grass. The stars wheeled quietly overhead, and the vast, indifferent land absorbed yet another fleeting life into its endless, tender silence. Beyond the daily struggles and the restless lives of outlaws, the American West held other, quieter mysteries that drifted like mirages across the land, tales of lost gold and hidden treasure that tugged at the edges of every settler as dreams. These stories traveled along wagon trails and saloon counters, whispered by lamplight in hushed, hopeful tones. Imagine sitting beside a small campfire on a cool desert evening. The flames danced low, sending slender spirals of smoke up into a velvet sky scattered thick with stars. Around the circle, weary men warmed their hands, boots dusty from long days of travel. One of them leans forward, voice dropping to a near whisper as he begins to spin a story older than the nearest town. He speaks of the lost Dutchman's mine, hidden somewhere among the rugged spires of the Superstition Mountains in Arizona. Picture those jagged peaks rising stark against the fading light, their rocky faces painted in shades of amber and deep rose. The legend tells of a German prospector who discovered a vein so rich with gold that he could scarcely carry it away. Some say he mined there for years, keeping the secret close, until finally he vanished into the dust and shadows, leaving behind only cryptic clues scratched on yellowed scraps of paper. Others who went seeking this hidden fortune often found little more than sunburn and thirst. The mountains could be cruel in their silence, offering no sign of the treasure so many longed to touch. Travelers returned with haunted eyes, speaking of strange shapes that moved among the rocks, of sudden storms that seemed to rise from nowhere, of a deep, unsettling sense that they were being watched by something older than any human claim. Yet hope was hard to extinguish on the frontier. Around countless campfires like this one, men and women clung to these shimmering possibilities. A map tucked inside a Bible, a half-remembered landmark, the rock that looks like a sleeping dog, someone might murmur, was enough to launch another quiet expedition into the wilderness. In the soft crackle of the fire and the gentle sigh of the wind through sagebrush, such stories took on a dreamy weight. They offered more than the promise of wealth. They gave shape to the longing that lived in every heart out here, the desire to uncover something marvelous, to be touched by luck so profound it might change the course of a hard, dusty life forever. So they listened, these tired travelers, eyes half closed, letting the tale drift through them like a lullaby. And in that tender space between waking and sleep, many surely dreamed of stumbling upon a narrow gulch glittering with gold, of filling their pockets until they could scarcely walk, of returning home with the burden of all their worries lifted by the gentle golden hands of fate. Further north, along the winding rivers and forested slopes of Montana and Idaho, whispered tales spoke of another mystery, the fabled lost mines of the Nez Perce country. These stories wound through the frontier like the rivers themselves, slow and glistening, carrying with them dreams of untold riches lying hidden beneath mossy stones and tangled roots. Picture a narrow stream curling through a grove of towering pines, sunlight breaking through in gentle shafts to dance across the water. Somewhere beneath that cool surface, gold was said to gather in secret drifts, waiting only for a careful hand to coax it into the daylight. Old trappers, their faces creased by wind and time, claimed they had once seen nuggets the size of walnuts resting among the gravel, shining bright as tiny suns. But the land did not give up its treasures easily. Those who ventured deep into these wooded valleys often found themselves lost among the labyrinth of ridges and canyons, each slope blending into the next until direction itself seemed to vanish. Nights in these wilds could be long and eerie, with the distant howl of wolves echoing through dark stands of fir and the sudden crack of twigs underfoot, stirring old fears that something unseen might be watching. Still, the stories persisted. Around the heavy wooden tables of trading posts, men traced lines across rough maps with blunt fingertips, arguing softly over faded notes and cryptic signs. A stand of 3 bent pines, one might say, voice low, and a black rock shaped like a crow's wing. That has how you know you re-close. Such clues were treasures in themselves, passed carefully from mouth to ear, like fragile glass. Even families traveling west in long lines of wagons carried these dreams with them. In the hush of evening, when children lay curled beneath quilts, and the fire had dwindled to embers, parents might speak quietly of someday stumbling across a hidden vein of gold or a secret creek bed lined with shining flakes. Their voices were almost shy, as though saying it too loud might scare the hope away. In truth, most who set out in search of these lost riches found only the solemn beauty of untouched wilderness. They returned with empty pockets, but hearts strangely full, for there was a certain gentle wonder in following an old story into the quiet places of the world, in standing beneath towering pines with the soft earth underfoot, and feeling, if only for a moment, that the land might yet choose to reveal one of its ancient glittering secrets. Far to the south, in the sun-baked mesas and canyons of New Mexico and Arizona, another kind of story lingered in the warm air. Tales not only of lost mines, but of entire caches of Spanish treasure left hidden centuries before by expeditions that vanished like mirages into the desert. Imagine standing amid the crimson rocks of an old ruin at twilight. The stone walls are crumbling, embraced by creeping sage and crowned with delicate blossoms of prickly pear. A soft wind moves through the broken archways, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and sun-warmed earth. Somewhere a lizard skitters across the path, and the only other sound is your own breathing. It was here, in these quiet corners of the desert, that hopeful seekers once dug feverishly, convinced they were mere feet from ancient vaults heavy with silver bars and chests, brimming with gold coins stamped with royal seals. Old maps inked on cracked parchment, handed down from uncle to nephew, or bought in hushed backroom dealings, pointed to crosses etched on lonely rocks or to cryptic symbols carved into canyon walls. By night, campfires spotted the dark landscape. Picture small groups huddled close to the flames, faces drawn and eyes shining with the glow of shared ambition. They spoke in soft voices, telling of monks who supposedly fled north with the riches of a doomed mission, burying it all beneath landmarks so cunningly described that generations later no one could quite agree on where the trail truly began. Some claimed to have found tantalizing signs, a hollow echo beneath a ledge of sandstone or a rusted sword hilt tangled in desert grass. But more often, they found only hard rock and deeper thirst. The days were hot and pitiless, the nights cold under a vault of blazing stars that seemed to whisper of mysteries forever out of reach. And yet there was a tender sort of solace in these quests. Around the fire, after tools had been set aside, voices would soften into half-sleep murmurs. Someone might pick up a fiddle or hum a gentle tune, the notes floating upward into the vast night. The flames danced low, throwing fleeting shadows across worn boots and hopeful faces, each person cradled by the simple comfort of the company beside them. It was not always the treasure that mattered most, but the quiet promise of what might be waiting just beyond the next rise, the next turn of the canyon wall. In this way the legends lived on, etched not into stone, but into the soft, patient places of human hearts, offering the gentle dream that tomorrow's sun might finally reveal a glint of hidden gold. Among all these legends of hidden riches, there were also stories, whispered in softer tones, not of gold or silver, but of sacred places and lost ways of life that lay just beyond the reach of time. These were tales kept alive by the indigenous peoples of the West, passed down in gentle cadence from elder to child beside evening fires. Picture a quiet valley at dawn, the earth cool and fragrant, rimmed by blue-gray ridges that hold the first delicate light like a cradle. Somewhere nearby, water flows over stones, its low murmur blending with the sleepy calls of morning birds. Here, the land itself was the true treasure, offering food, shelter, and the subtle threads that wove spirit and soil into a single tender tapestry. Elders would tell of hidden springs that never ran dry, of ancient petroglyphs carved into canyon walls, winding shapes and symbols that spoke of migrations, of hunts, of the deep kinship shared with every living thing. These places held no glittering metal, yet their value was beyond measure, holding memories older than any town that would ever rise on the plains. Travelers sometimes stumbled upon these sites, coming upon stone circles laced with offerings of feathers and beads. Though few understood full meaning of what they found, many felt an unspoken hush settle over them, as if the very air urged stillness. A wind might move lightly through juniper branches, carrying with it a faint song that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. There were also tales of villages long swallowed by grass and sagebrush, homes where laughter and weeping had once echoed between walls of clay and timber. The people had moved on, drawn by seasons or hardship, or the gentle call of another land, but something of them lingered in the careful arrangement of stones, in pottery shards smoothed by time, in the way a deer paused on the edge of a clearing, as though listening for forgotten voices. At night, when the sky unfurled its silent canopy of stars, these stories came alive around small fires. Grandparents spoke slowly, their voices soft and even weaving old words that wrapped the children close like a warm blanket. And under that wide sky, each person felt linked not just to family, but to the very breath of the land, to the slow rivers, the patient hills, the enduring stones. In such moments it was easy to see that the greatest treasures of the West were not hidden veins of gold, but these quiet, enduring connections. They were treasures of memory and belonging, of knowing one as place, in a world vast and old and filled with tender mysteries, riches that did not glitter, yet shone all the same in the gentle hearts of those who listened. While so many on the frontier rose each day to toil under the sun, their hands rough and their futures uncertain, there existed another world entirely, the domain of the frontier elite, whose lives offered a striking contrast to the hard labors of cowboys, miners, and homesteaders. These were the wealthy ranchers, mine owners, railroad magnates, and large landholders who carved out enclaves of quiet privilege amid the rugged expanse. Imagine a broad veranda overlooking gently rolling pastures, the boards polished smooth by careful hands. Here sits a man in a fine wool vest, boots shined to a rich luster, a silver watch chain glinting at his waist. He sips coffee from delicate porcelain while the early sun casts a golden warmth over manicured lawns that stand in serene defiance of the wild prairie just beyond. Behind him, the house itself rises with an almost startling grandeur. 2 stories of sturdy timber, hauled at great expense, wide windows dressed in heavy curtains, and stone fireplaces whose chimneys breathe out gentle plumes of smoke. Inside, the air is hushed and cool, carrying the faint scent of beeswax polish and lilacs arranged in graceful bowls. Walls are adorned with paintings brought from distant cities, rugs lie soft underfoot, and chandeliers send tiny rainbows across the ceilings when the light catches just right. At the long dining table, meals are served on fine china by quiet, watchful hands. Silver utensils rest beside linen napkins, and the courses arrive in graceful succession. Fresh bread still steaming from the oven, tender cuts of meat, preserves in crystal dishes that catch the morning light like little pools of ruby and amber. Conversation here drifts easily from accounts ledgers to letters received from distant kin, with only the occasional murmur of concern over cattle prices or the latest tremors in local politics. Outside, stable boys lead sleek horses through the yard, their coats brushed to a glossy sheen. Carriages wait under wide oaks to carry the family into town, or on leisurely afternoon drives across their holdings. The children of such households play on shaded lawns with hoops and dolls, their laughter ringing bright but untroubled by thoughts of the next harvest or the price of flour. And yet, even in this world of gentle refinement, the vastness of the frontier was never far away. Beyond the fences and garden walls stretched endless miles of prairie and hills, a reminder that this fragile comfort was a rare bloom in a landscape still ruled by weather, distance, and quiet, watchful eyes. At night, when lamps were extinguished and the stars swept overhead in their silent grandeur, perhaps even these well-appointed hearts felt a small stirring of awe, a gentle awareness of how slender their shelter was, cradled within such an immense and patient wilderness. Beyond the wide verandas and quiet parlors of the frontier elite, life continued in gentle rhythms that spoke of both privilege and a subtle, ever-present caution. For though these families lived with comforts unknown to most settlers, fine wardrobes, imported wines, and elegant gatherings, they were still tethered to the unpredictable heart of the West. Picture an afternoon garden party under the dappled shade of cottonwoods, where women in dresses of pale muslin and delicate lace stroll with gloved hands resting on parasols. The air is filled with the low murmur of polite conversation and the occasional trill of laughter. A table under a canvas awning is set with chilled lemonade and small cakes, each adorned with careful swirls of frosting that gleam in the soft light. Nearby, gentlemen discuss matters of cattle herds and mineral rights. They stand in small knots, boots dusted yet finely tooled, waistcots snug across broad chests. Occasionally one draws out a pocket watch, as if reassured by the measured certainty of its ticking even here, far from the marble halls of eastern banks. Every so often a rider arrives at the edge of the lawn with a telegram or letter, and though the message is often mundane, there passes across the faces of these men a fleeting shadow, a subtle reminder that fortunes could change as quickly as the weather on these wide plains. Inside the house, music drifts from a polished piano where a young woman bends over the keys, her fingers coaxing out a gentle waltz. In the adjoining parlor, older guests sit with their tea, speaking softly of news from back east, of nieces marrying or cousins moving to Europe, their voices tinged with a longing for the familiar world they left behind. Yet through the open windows comes the scent of prairie grass and warm earth, an insistent reminder that this elegant life is only one layer resting lightly atop a much older, wilder land. Beyond the carefully tended grounds, ranch hands move steadily among grazing herds, their low voices carried by the breeze. Out there, life is marked not by music or delicate pastries, but by the steady rhythm of hooves, the hiss of rope, and the sigh of wind through endless fields. As evening comes on, lanterns are lit along the porch, casting small golden pools of light against the gathering dusk. The garden party disperses, guests stepping into carriages that crunch softly over gravel drives. From the edge of the lawn, one might look back at the house, windows glowing warmly, voices drifting out in gentle waves. And beyond that fragile ring of lamplight lies a vast, calm darkness, the quiet heart of the frontier that holds all these little human worlds in its patient, unhurried hands. As night settled fully across the frontier, the contrast between the lives of the wealthy and those who served them became ever clearer. though often only in the tender hush of private moments. Inside the grand homes, the evening hours unfolded with soft elegance. Dinners of roasted meats and fresh greens, candlelight flickering in delicate sconces, the low melodious strains of a piano drifting through open doorways. Picture a dining room where laughter rises easily among polished silver and crystal goblets. A gentleman leans back in his chair to share a clever anecdote, and across the table a lady hides her smile behind a lace fan, eyes sparkling in the glow. Outside the tall windows, the lanterns in the yard glow like small stars, pushing gently against the deep velvet of the prairie night. But beyond these bright rooms, in the quiet spaces below stairs or in small cabins behind the main house, life was shaped by simpler, sterner routines. Cooks and maids, stable hands and laundresses, many of them immigrants or freed people seeking a new life, ended. Their long days with weary bodies and thoughts turned toward modest hopes. They gathered in plain kitchens where the air was rich with lingering scents of bread and broth, sharing small bowls of stew and quiet conversation. Imagine a young maid sitting by a low hearth, mending a tear in her apron by the wavering light of a single candle. Her hands move steadily, though her eyelids droop with exhaustion. Across from her, an older woman hums a slow tune, stitching a button onto a fine coat that must be ready by morning. In the corner, a boy fresh from the stables dozes with his head on folded arms, straw still caught in his hair. There was a gentle dignity in these hidden corners of the household. Though their tasks were never finished, the next day would bring more fires to stoke, more garments to wash, more floors to scrub. There was comfort in familiar rhythms. The quiet promise of a letter from home, a new pair of shoes bought with carefully saved wages, or a small cluster of wildflowers gathered on the walk to the well might bring more true gladness than all the fine dances in the parlor. Sometimes late at night, when the laughter and music above had faded into hush, these servants stepped outside to look up at the same vast sky their employers admired from cushioned chairs. Stars stretched in countless silent ranks overhead, and for a moment there was no division at all. Just a tender miracle of breathing under such an endless watching dome of night, where all were equally small, equally held in the soft hands of the quiet prairie. By the soft light of dawn, the distinctions of class seemed to fade just a little, gently smoothed by the calm embrace of the waking land. Whether rich or humble, all rose under the same pale sky, breath the same, crisp air laced with dew and distant wood smoke, and stood quietly for a moment in that fragile stillness that visits just before the world stirs to life. On the sprawling estates of the frontier elite, the morning began with measured ease. Picture a lady standing at an upstairs window, drawing aside a heavy curtain to watch the sun spill gold across distant fields. Below, gardeners move slowly among neat rows of roses, their hands already stained with damp earth. Inside, housemaids tiptoe through shadowed halls, opening shutters one by one so that gentle light may pour in and awaken polished floors and portraits in heavy frames. In the kitchens, copper pots bubble softly over well-tended stoves. The cook leans over to taste a simmering sauce, her expression thoughtful, the ladle steaming in her hand. A younger helper brings in fresh eggs, her apron still dusted with straw from the henhouse. Between them passes a few murmured words, perhaps a brief shared laugh, small moments of grace woven through long hours of labor. Meanwhile, far out along the edge of the property, ranch hands saddle horses in the chill air, breath rising in faint clouds. They slapped dust from their hats and tightened cinches, preparing for a long day riding fences or driving cattle to new pasture. In these quiet early hours, before the heat builds and the work begins in earnest, even the horses seem subdued, their dark eyes calm and reflective. It was in such tender beginnings that one could glimpse how, despite the gulf between manor and bunkhouse, between silk-lined parlors and dirt-floored cabins, the people of the frontier all shared in the deep, slow heartbeat of the land. All felt the same hush of dawn, all paused beneath the same unfolding sky. As the sun lifted higher, life would once again divide itself into its many labors and luxuries. Fine tables laid for midday luncheons, shirts soaked through with sweat under a relentless sun, letters read aloud in cool drawing rooms, children chasing each other across hard-packed yards. Yet under it all ran that quiet truth of the frontier, that no matter one's station, all were bound together by the immensity and indifference of the vast West, and by the tender, shared hope that tomorrow might unfold with a little more gentle kindness than the day before. And so, under the wide, patient sky of the American West, all these lives unfolded: settlers and ranchers, cowboys and outlaws, miners and indigenous families, each moving through days shaped by quiet struggles and small triumphs woven together by the soft, enduring fabric of the land itself. In this far-reaching place, the mornings began with the same tender light spilling across dew-kissed grass, the same low call of birds greeting the sun. The evenings fell with the same hush, drawing cool shadows over cabins and grand houses alike, pressing every soul to pause and breathe in the tranquil dark. Whether one sat by a crackling hearth in a humble sod home or by a marble fireplace in a fine estate, the sigh of the wind against the eaves carried the same gentle promise that all were part of this vast, slow-turning world held in its calm, timeless embrace. The stories of hardship, of blisters earned in rocky fields, of guns drawn in dimly lit saloons, of children lost to fever or drought, were balanced by countless moments of simple grace. A cup of cool water drawn fresh from a well, the soft laughter of neighbors gathered for a quilting bee, the mellow notes of a fiddle drifting across a porch at dusk. Even the legends of buried gold and ghostly riders offered their own kind of comfort, allowing hearts worn thin by daily toil to dream of wonders waiting just beyond the horizon. And in the stillest hours of night, when lanterns guttered low and only the stars kept watch, perhaps all who lived upon this land felt the same gentle ache, a tender yearning for belonging, for peace, for the sweet hush of a life simply lived beneath the endless dome of heaven. So let these memories of the West linger with you now like the last glow of sunset on distant hills. Let them wrap around you softly, carrying with them the slow rustle of prairie grass, the faint scent of wood smoke, the warm murmur of old stories shared in kindly voices. And as your thoughts drift gently toward rest, may you find yourself wandering those quiet trails, breathing deep of the calm air, at peace in a world that moves with unhurried grace through time.